Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I will be speaking on ranking and evaluation of universities worldwide and its implications for OIC universities or universities in OIC member countries. I was told that there was quite some discussion on this issue of ranking this morning. Unfortunately, I was not here. I was busily preparing my PowerPoint, actually, not putting finishing touches, but actually, although I have a paper, but I think if I were to read out the paper, it will take more than an hour. So anyway, these are some of the points which I would like to discuss in my presentation today, namely globalization and its impact on higher education, characteristics of world-class universities, the relationship between ranking and quality of universities, because it has sometimes been assumed that there's an automatic relationship between ranking and the quality of universities, that if you're highly ranked, then university is necessarily better, but is that the case? And then on the issue of methodology of university ranking, what sort of methodology was used? And here, of course, the two most popular cases, the Times Higher Education Supplement and the Shanghai Tiaozhong approaches. And then there are the alternative approaches to assessment and evaluation, namely carried out in Germany and the Netherlands, which does not necessarily follow the method and model used by the other two. And then criticisms and weaknesses of ranking methodology and procedure. I believe this has been discussed this morning. And finally, a section on where should OIC universities be heading towards in relation to this question of ranking and so on. Okay, some quotes from my paper itself. I read the first quote. The quote, "Why must there be some kind of contest amongst universities around the world? Is it well intended? And does it set some kind of benchmark to improve the quality of higher education around the globe? Or have we once again been fed with a new kind of propaganda, and this time a more sophisticated kind of propaganda induced by the forces of neoliberal capitalism and perhaps also of a kind of intellectual imperialism under the guise of meritocracy?" Quote number 2. "Although competition will help us to improve ourselves through learning good things from top universities, there still are several things to consider on the issue of rankings before we conform to it. As some people might say, birds do not need a race to fly higher. However, like it or not, the trend of university ranking, which is brought by the so-called globalization influence of global benchmarking, will likely be here to stay. And perhaps, as the first step, we should diagnose the concept and methodology of rankings in order to have a better understanding before making any judgment." And that was what I intended to do in that paper which I wrote. Now, on the issue of globalization. While some writers use globalization to explain what is happening to the modern world, such as greater global economic connectedness and the emergence of a new world economy, others regard globalization itself as the process that needs explaining by, say, theories of capitalism or models of the constant creation of new forms of technology. Note that many see globalization as a purely economic phenomenon, as worldwide economic integration powered by neoliberal politics, electronics, instantaneous communications, and the multinational corporations, while others see it more as a form of Western cultural imperialism or as having a political dimension and agenda. Now, globalization is discussed here as a background to the issue of higher education because there's a relationship between the two. Now, on the question of university and the state. Universities are the instruments of the state, too, regulated and funded by them, especially in third world post-colonial countries. And although research is becoming increasingly globally and socially networked and distributed, as Michael Gibbons has observed, teaching and community relations are functions of universities that are still largely rooted within national boundaries, despite the internet and the commercial growth of global higher education. This means that although the influence of globalization is becoming pervasive, there are certain areas where local influences still predominant, and this includes control over higher education, where some states see it as their prerogative to set regulations on university development. On the Bologna process, which has been mentioned earlier, I think in the opening session. Now, there's tensions between the state and global forces, and between governments and universities can be found at a number of levels. One is in different interpretations of international agreements by governments. To take one example, for some countries, the European Bologna process to seek greater harmonization between members' university systems is a means for making European universities more competitive in the face of American, Australian, and Asian challenges for international fee-paying students and commercial research opportunities. For others, however, Bologna is regarded as a form of protection from globalization for public service higher education in Europe. So there are two ways of looking at it. One is that the Bologna process is a process of greater openness. On the other hand, it can be seen as a closing up against forces of globalization. Now, convergence in evaluation, which has to do with university ranking. Despite persisting references in national educational policies, there is evidence that globalization tends to increase international and supranational convergence on higher education policies by governments and also on forms of regulation. The forces affecting higher education around the world are often strikingly similar, and they include expanding enrollments, less public funding, lifetime learning, and new disciplines, and may be regarded as constituting global phenomena. This implies that similar standards will eventually be adopted by universities worldwide in evaluating their own performances. And of course, ranking has to do with that issue of convergence in evaluation. Now, globalization, on the issue of globalization and university orientation. Will globalization make universities even more the instruments of the nation state as part of the aim by governments to generate comparative economic advantage in an integrated knowledge-based world economy? Or does it make universities go for autonomy and feel free to pursue their own academic vision? Or will globalization and the attendant commercialization and corporatization of universities lead them to drift away from social objectives and grip of the nation state to pursue their own corporate, increasingly national and multinational interests? And what will happen to those universities that remain behind? Must governments simply bow to the globalization forces, or should they just ignore the influence of globalization and pretend like they never existed? Of course, these are not the only two options. Maybe there's some form of compromise between them. Now, this is basically the aim of a paper, to analyze and enhance understanding on the concept of world-class universities and on the question of higher education and university ranking in OSCE member countries. Of course, we've heard conversations on world-class universities, slogans and rhetoric on world-class universities. Everybody's trying to achieve the status of world-class universities. Now, here are some of the characteristics which I have outlined in my paper. Number one, excellence in research. Number two, good governance. 3, academic freedom. 4, adequate infrastructure. 5, adequate funding. 6, quality of faculty. 7, talented undergraduate body. Number 8, international presence, faculty members and as well as students. And number 9, embracing many disciplines. Now, of course, there are several issues involved in ranking. For example, how reliable is the ranking procedure? And these are some of the issues which I have come up with in the paper. And recent developments in rankings number 1 by Shanghai Jiao Tong University in China, and number 2 by Times Higher Education Supplement. I'm sure that you all are aware of this. These are the indicators or the criteria used by Times Higher Education Supplement in the 2004 assessment. Peer review assessment, 50%. Citations per faculty, 20%. Student staff ratios, 20%. International student population in the university, 5%. International staff, 5%. Total, 100%. For 2005, they have reduced the peer review assessment If you look at the earlier one, it was peer review was 50%. Now it's 40%. So there's a reduction there. And then this is the criteria used for 2006. The peer review is also set at 40%, it remains at 40%. So research quality is gauged in terms of peer review and citations per faculty. Graduate employability, how employable are your graduates? This is 10% from recruiter review, and then international outlook, faculty 5%, students 5%, teaching quality 20% based on student-staff ratio. Okay, so there is some debate on these two criteria, and some people say that, well, they are just variations on a theme, both are equally unacceptable and sort of things. But the main difference, I suppose, is in peer review. In the Times Education Lab supplement assessment, 40% is dedicated to peer review, but in the Shanghai assessment, if I'm not mistaken, there was no marks given to peer review. Instead, they have used other indicators. These are the indicators used in the Shanghai ranking. Quality of education based on alumni of an institution winning Nobel Prizes and field medals, 10%. Quality of faculty, staff of an institution winning Nobel Prizes, 20%. Highly cited researchers in 21 broad subject categories, 20%. Research output, for research output, only certain articles are accepted, published in Nature and Science, like the one we saw at the nanotechnology briefing just now. Articles in Science Citation Index expanded and Social Science Citation Index, another 20%, and size of institution and so on. So they have a different set of criteria as compared to the Times Higher Education Supplement. And of course, some of the countries have their own forms of assessment. For example, in Germany, the Center for Development of Universities, CHE, applies a broad range of criteria to judge the standing of German universities with a focus on specific disciplines. So they don't have a sort of one-size-fits-all kind of assessment. Okay, there are some problems in ranking methodology. I've indicated this in my paper. Peer review, is it reliable? And then problems to do with bibliometric analysis and so on. But the question is, do these problems apply to evaluation of universities in OIC countries? I think they apply more to European, Japanese or Chinese universities, these kind of problems. I mean, these are problems really affecting good universities in Europe, Japan, or China who do not fare well in terms of those criteria. But I don't think it would make any difference for OIC countries. Okay, these are some problems in ranking procedures. I will just quickly read the last part of my paper, since Tim has suggested to me that it would be a good idea if I do this instead of going through the rigmarole of explaining what the two systems are about. Now, after having discussed some of the characteristics, shortcomings, and methodological issues relating to world university ranking, what policies should OIC countries adopt towards the matter? In the latest 2006 ranking carried out by Times Higher Education Supplement, among the universities from OIC countries, if I'm not mistaken, only 2 Malaysian universities, namely the University Kebangsaan Malaysia and University Malaya, appeared in the top 200. The question is, how come this happened? And should we be critical of the ranking itself and not participate in it? OIC represents 57 countries, and Muslims form about a quarter of the world's population. Yet its performance in world university ranking is dismal. However, this is not surprising if we look at some of the science and technology indicators. For example, the number of scientific publications and patents, the number of researchers per million people, which bears a relationship to university ranking, in which OIC countries fared poorly. In other words, OIC countries are behind when compared to Asia, Europe, and America in terms of both science and technology, as well as educational achievement. Thus, if we were to adopt a policy of participation in world university ranking, it would not do to apply cosmetic changes by leveraging on the criteria used in the ranking procedure, but what is needed instead is nothing short than a paradigm shift in university management, something which OIC countries might not be prepared to do, since it involves a holistic change and might clash with other national priorities set up by their respective governments. To take an example, let us look at one of the criteria used by Times Higher Education, namely international staff and students. Not many OIC countries can afford to offer places to foreign students in their universities in view of the shortage of places even for their own citizens. Nor can they afford to reduce the staff-student ratio, since this would imply either extra expenditure in recruiting more academic staff or depriving some students from entering universities in order to keep the staff-student ratio low. The fact of the matter is that in a competitive world, the disadvantaged are simply not equipped to compete with those in the top league and could only do so at their own expense and detriment. In fact, it would make more sense for the OIC countries to set their own standards and priorities, which are realistic in nature given the constraints and limited resources at their disposal, and aim towards improving the standards of the universities themselves in providing better quality education to its citizens instead of pursuing the chimerical aim of joining those in the top league. Also, those in the top leagues such as Harvard, Cambridge, and Oxford have a long tradition of academic excellence backed by sound finance, management, and resources, something which OIC countries, being mainly newly independent post-colonial states and still dependent on their former colonial metropolis, do not have. Perhaps one approach which the OIC can adopt towards the currently popular practice of world university ranking is to adopt a 2- or 3-tier approach in which universities in OIC countries are classified according to high, medium, and low, in which case only those in the high category and already in a state of readiness be encouraged to compete and given the necessary financial and infrastructural support by the OIC as a collective body, perhaps through IDB. These universities should in turn serve as a model and provide support and consultancy services to other OIC universities so as to improve the condition of OIC universities as a whole. In this way, the dilemma of elitism versus egalitarianism in university education can perhaps be resolved amongst OIC countries. Those universities from OIC countries classified under high can be looked upon as potential candidates to be included in the top 200 and should therefore be given the necessary backing. The types of support that could be given to these universities include, for example, number 1, engaging consultants to help the universities conduct their strategic planning and devise plans of action aimed at improving university management and quality of education and research. Number 2, adopt an aggressive recruitment policy by hiring qualified staff and researchers from around the world in order to improve the quality of research and education, as well as help boost the number of publications and patents. Number 3, provide the necessary infrastructure such as ICT facilities and up-to-date laboratories to facilitate education and research. And number 4, help set up publishing houses or buy over established publishing houses to facilitate publication and marketing of books and journals in the world academic and educational market. As for universities in the medium and low category, a different approach should be adopted towards the development in which world university ranking need not be of paramount concern. Instead, they should aim at optimizing the use of resources for the delivery of quality education that would contribute towards the national development of those countries. For this purpose, some sort of guideline or criteria can be formulated and adopted, but not those set up by the more advanced countries, which in any case is unsuitable for the development of universities from the less developed countries. Instead of adopting a criterion such as publication in ISI index journals, other more relevant criteria such as relevance of publication to national needs and problems can serve as a criterion in their local journals. Although this might sound as if we're encouraging a closed system that denies merit at the international level, some sort of standard can be instituted by tightening the peer review or refereeing process by including reputable scientists from the more advanced countries in their editorial or review board to ensure academic quality within the context of national relevance. The world of information, like world mass media, comes under the hegemony of advanced nations, which sets to impose standards on the rest of the world through the process of globalization. Thus, developing countries should not fall under this trap and demoralize themselves by acquiescing to such norms and standards. Without turning a blind eye to standards, they should instead focus on their own strategy of self-improvement and not let themselves be discouraged even before getting to the starting line. Concluding remark. Islamic societies, in order to achieve cultural authenticity, need therefore to draw on their own cultural and intellectual resources in facing such challenges, and not merely become a satellite of the West by echoing the stale neoliberal capitalist rhetoric thinly disguised as globalization or internationalization. For instance, Islamic ethics and value system should come to the fore in assessing and deciding what is best for the Ummah, and informs the Muslim in his soul-searching endeavor to find and do what is best for his community. Our objectives should be informed by our values, not by those who seek to structure and fashion the world economy in their own skewed images, to which we are mere pawns and statistics in their own economic calculations. If human unity is a desired goal, then it should be informed by higher and more noble values, by religious ethics, for instance, and not by market forces or crass materialism. Thank you.